Welcome back to Three Men and a Mystery. I'm one of the three men, John Lorden.
And I'm Mike Morford.
And I'm Gray Hughes.
And as you can tell, sounds like Morph is a little under the weather. I'm a little under the weather as well. Gray's the only healthy one, so we're going to turn the show over to him.
And good evening.
No, that's okay. I'm taking it back. This is episode 10 of season 2, Silenced, the Death of Elisa Gomez. Today, we're going to talk to someone that's been investigating the case firsthand, and he wants to share with us why he thinks this is indeed a murder and not a suicide. We'd like to welcome John Bishop to the show. Hello, John.
Hello, everyone.
Hey, John.
Hey.
Thank you so much for
John.
joining us. Yeah. So, of course, the audience wants to know, what's your background? We know that you're looking into this case now, but what type of expertise do you have around stuff like this? Can you tell us a bit about yourself?
I've been a police officer since 1990 in Oklahoma. I was deputy sheriff for 2 years, and then I've been a police officer for the state of Oklahoma since 1992. I've done criminal investigations for over 10 years, and during my tenure as a lead detective, I've done numerous homicides and suicides by hanging, strangulation cases. I've worked some terrorism cases in Oklahoma and nationally, and I have a strong investigative background. I've been on the Oklahoma Gang Investigators Association for over 20 years and led that association too.
Wow. So obviously got some good experience for taking on something like this. And you've handled cases specifically like this before, right?
Yes, sir.
How did you get involved with this case in particular?
My fiance told me about this case, and it kept coming on her feed, and she knew a cousin of Elisa's. They'd gone to a class in third grade, and I've met her in third grade. And we also had a mutual friend who was from third grade, became one of our good friends, and was also a cousin of Elisa's. It was just one of those, it's a small world coincidence that I was born and raised in Minneapolis, and through association, I knew the Gomez family, but I didn't know Elisa. And then another coincidence was that my fiance and I were also born in June 1969 in Minneapolis. And she wanted to look at this case, and she sensed the strong injustice. And I read the City Page article, and then I looked at your video blog that you had on the case. And that intrigued me enough to take a look at it. And as soon as I started looking at the case, I saw a lot of things that just weren't right. And I wanted to know more. So my fiance and I, Carrie, we started working on the Gomez case, and we talked to Judy Hunt and started gathering information. And the more I learned about the case, the more I could just see that what it was on the surface was not what was presented to like the police from Brad and Sharon, and the physical evidence just didn't match up with the stories they were putting out.
Now, obviously, that's one of the big things that we've been struggling with, trying to understand this. And, for us, looking at records of an investigation is a lot different than, you're talking about doing mock-ups. Just going to really different lengths of trying to understand this. And the wall we keep hitting is about the physical evidence. We keep saying it looks like a suicide from a lot of the physical layout. I've had questions about the lividity. I know you've got some points we're going to talk about with that today. We've got this really bizarre question about the scarf, how that could have been used. Why is there a ring of hair tied near the bottom of it? So I know we've got a lot to talk about with all that. But before we get into that, I'm curious, with you doing this kind of on your free time and taking this on, are you running into any issues in terms of conflicts with looking into a case in someone else's jurisdiction?
Not in Oklahoma. I've got a lot of support down there. In Minneapolis, it seems like it's a fight to get information. I'm going to go open records request to get information from Minneapolis PD, like the 911 calls, and the information I have has come solely from Judy and what she's got from the Minneapolis Police Department and the Hennepin County Medical Examiner's office.
Okay. So no big trouble. No one's telling you get away from this or anything currently?
Not yet.
Okay. Have you tried speaking to Sergeant Villela or Jensen?
I haven't. Sergeant Villela retired. I haven't reached out to Sergeant Jensen yet. I wanted to have an understanding of the case in its entirety before I reached out to the officers. And I think the first ones I want to talk to are Officer Willis and Officer Dean from the Minneapolis Police Department. They did an outstanding job on when they arrived, and Officer Willis makes some statements about this is not a straight up dead on arrival. He hung her, and his initial observations within the first 5 minutes of the being on the scene are, that's his training and experience. He sees it firsthand, and that's what he makes. So he was one of the first ones I want to talk to. They both did a great job. And then I want to talk to the detectives. I don't know if they want to talk to me about the case. But the work that was done on the case has given me enough insight to lead me on to exploring other avenues as far as like the crime scene photos and the physical evidence that Elisa presented with the lividity and the blanching and the body positioning. It's that strong enough that I think that the Hennepin County Medical Examiner's Office should make a cause determination of murder instead of suicide or undetermined.
So that's your goal ultimately with all this?
Yes, sir.
All right. Well, I know you've been putting a list together of different points. How many points do you currently have on this list?
There's 34 on my list. Carrie and Judy want me to add a few more. And on these points, I'm trying to go through each one of them and prove or disprove or have supporting evidence that, validates my points to suspect homicide versus suicide.
All right. Well, with that being said, let's go ahead and move on to the list and share with us what your findings are.
Just when I started looking at this case, the first thing I had was the cell phone text messages and the police report. And the initial review of it, it looked like it could have been a suicide. And when I got the crime scene photos and the body cameras from the officers, a lot of things jumped out. And one of the first things that hit me was Officer Willis stating to his partner, Officer Dean, he said, this is not a straight up dead on arrival. Brad Alexander, hung her, and we need to get homicide out here. And, being a police officer for 30 years, I understand what an officer sees and, his first impression of the crime scene, and that shouldn't be easily discounted. They had a very strong suspicion then, so it's one of my top 10. His initial impression of the crime scene and Elisa's position was enough to suspicion for him right then and there in the first few minutes to say this is a homicide.
Yeah, I think that's always been really tough for me to understand too. I know we've talked about it on the show before, but why was her body moved? Why was she cut down? It just, the logic seems to defy. I mean, you go downstairs, you find your friend, they're hanging. You could tell, and we've seen photos of the scene and autopsy photos. There was no chance that she was still alive at the time that they found her.
None.
So this wasn't a rescue effort in terms of cutting her down. And I know some people are talking about different emotional reasons why you might cut someone down in that manner. But does any of that make sense for you? Do you understand or have any understanding? I mean, you've looked into other cases like this. Have you seen scenes manipulated like that, or?
No, I have not seen a scene manipulated like this. And I have a theory that the reason why Elisa was cut down is that the position that she was in when Sharon went downstairs obviously didn't look like a suicide, and it had to be changed or staged to make it look more believable that she committed suicide.
Wow.
So some of the things I noticed looking at Elisa's text messages, she sent her last two messages she sent out. One was to Brad Alexander, and that was at 1:46 a.m. Now, we know from the Cedar Inn videos that she left at midnight 44 on the 11th. So at 1:46, she says to Brad, "We made a mistake. It's not the end of the world. I'm on my way back." So she's not with Brad, and she's saying, "I'm on my way back, and we made a mistake. It's not the end of the world." 4 minutes later, she sends a text message to Sharon, and it says, "We really don't belong together. I need to be on my own." And initially, I thought that text message was about Brad. Through later investigation, I believe now that message was about Sharon Vestal, and that was Elisa telling Sharon we don't belong together, and she was cutting ties with Sharon too. That puts both of these people, her husband and her roommate, in conflict with Elisa.
That would be a very interesting situation because you would wonder what would prompt that, particularly, I think something that's obvious from looking at the text exchange is there was a bit of a codependent relationship very quickly happening between Elisa and Brad. There was things that she wanted from him on an emotional level, but they were also basically thrown into running a business together. And through the text messages, you can also see Sharon was also becoming part of that business too. They had someone that was driving around for them to do checks on dogs. That person didn't want to work with them anymore. And Elisa was kind of preparing Sharon to come into the business as well.
Yeah, she states that in one text message, I'm trying to give my business to Sharon.
Yeah.
And then Sharon and Brad also start becoming codependent on each other. Brad needs Sharon to use Elisa's vehicles to pick him up and do transportation for him too.
Yeah. A lot of ties going on here. And for Elisa to take that stance with either of them is already a strong statement. But to your point, it looks like she might have actually been referring to both of them.
Yes.
I guess you could say it's speculating to say that they, cut her down to make it look more like a suicide. I mean, a murder. Well, a suicide rather than a murder. Like the position that she was hanging in. I mean, we don't ever get to know exactly how she was hanging because Sharon isn't. You can't really trust anything any of these people are saying, to be honest with you.
I do a little bit more work on Elisa on the crime scene, and I can tell you how the position she was in when she was dying, when the lividity set in, and her body is in a position that is contrary to the statements that Alexander and Vestal give to the police.
Why don't we go ahead and launch into that now? So it's been interesting, guys, because this whole season I keep talking about the lividity, and it doesn't look right. The marks on her legs in particular seem to be pointing in some other position other than her just hanging from a rafter, which is kind of the simple version of the story that we hear when we listen to the detective interviews with Sharon in particular. John, give us some insight. What do you think is going on with the body position there?
Well, initially, when I read the report, I thought it could be a suicide. So when you see the crime scene photos, you want to see if the physical evidence is supporting what the witness statements are. And the witness statements that Sharon made really alerted me at first. She said, I didn't even look at the front of her. Honestly, I just literally started snipping the back of it. I don't know how long she'd been that way. I didn't look at her face. And when she said, honestly, I just literally, that's a qualifying statement from my training and experience, interview interrogations and kinesthetic interviews. That's a qualifying statement, and what usually falls behind that is false. So I wanted to look more at the body position. And Elisa's body was into the room by almost 3/4 length of her body. So the threshold of the doorway where she was supposedly hanging from was about equal with her calves. And her calves, I was looking at the back of her calves and I would see lividity and blanching. Now, lividity is the blood pooling at the lowest part of the body. Gravity takes effect and moves blood down there. And blanching happens when an object presses against the body and moves the blood around so that lividity doesn't happen. And in some cases, you can actually see objects that are pressed against the skin, and there'll be blanching, a white spot in the lividity that will show the object. And I really became interested and focused in on a portion of her left calf. When she was laying face down, there was a whole lot of blanching on her left calf, and her left leg is extended almost straight out. And her right leg has a bend in it, and there's lividity and blanching that shows me that the right leg had blanching in it. And when they roll Elisa's body over, rigor mortis is still set in, so her legs are pretty much still stiff, and they still stay in that same position. So do her arms. But the left calf had unique marks on it. And what I was able to do was take that left calf, and I found a spot on the floor where her right knee was. And when they rolled her over, I could clearly see the floor. Her right knee had modeling from this uneven concrete surface in the bedroom. And I took a picture of that concrete and her left calf, and I posed them so that you could have them fade through each other. And it's an exact match. It's like a jigsaw piece puzzle, and it's an exact match. And I sent you guys the pictures of it, and you can, if you look at the pictures and line them up next to each other, you can see how similar they are. But when you put the pictures and make them go through, and I did this on a PowerPoint presentation, you can actually see line by line, detail by detail. Her left calf was in this spot, which means that it was her left calf was down and her leg was up. And then if you look at the left thigh, you can see where her left hand was. There's blanching from her fingers on her left thigh. And then you can also see where her right hand was on her left thigh. So that means that she was sitting up and facing towards the stairs. Well, both Brad and Sharon said that her back was to the stairs, was not facing them, and that when she was cut down by Sharon, she fell straight down. She was already seated on the ground. She couldn't have fallen.
There's a lot of things about that particular analysis that are ringing true for me, just in terms of one of the things I was bothered by is where her feet wind up. Because if you are thinking about her being fully suspended and she dropped straight to the ground, as Sharon described, her feet should have been pretty close to directly below where that beam was. And they're not. They've obviously been pulled closer to the stairwell. So when you think about that situation, that she was actually sitting on the ground, kind of facing the stairwell, that means something was propping up her back. And for them to roll her over or to turn her over, it's one pretty simple move if she's already on the ground there. I mean, you're literally just rolling her in place to get her into the position that she's found in when the first
How was
responders.
she seated on the ground? Were her feet straight out?
Her left foot was straight out. Her right foot was bent, almost at a 45-degree angle. If you look at the Minneapolis crime scene photo, it's 18782, and it's redacted, but you'll see that her right leg is bent and her left leg is straight, and she's face down over the stool.
Well, there's the white area where you were mentioning you could do it. You do have an overlay on her left leg, but how come her thigh area has the lividity coloring to it? The positive, so I guess.
The blood's pulling from the upper body to the lower body. It follows, goes to the lowest point. So her legs are going to have lividity in it, top and bottom, because it's lower than their upper body. And she was seated in a sitting position. And what John was touching on was that she was propped up. There's actual signs of blanching and lividity on her back that match the step stool too. So not only was she seated, but you can see where her buttocks are pressed against the ground, but she also has blanching from the step stool on her lower back, which means that she was she was pulled up onto the step stool, or she was on that step stool, her lower back was. And this is an exact match to the step stool. And I happened a couple days ago, I picked up a step stool, so I'll be working on that one and sending it to you guys too. But you'll see that this step stool is the exact same shape as the blanching on her back.
Yeah, thankfully in the autopsy photos, they actually include a measurement item there. So John was able to take that measurement and then look at the marks on her back, and we're looking at an exact match for the step stool.
That's interesting. I wonder if we could do something where I have a program called Poser with characters in it, and we could, place her exactly how you're describing and see if everything lines up.
Well, that's my goal. And correct me if I'm wrong. You made you took a picture and you got the height for the header for where the scarf was hung, correct?
We got a picture of someone that was actually there, and we knew her height, and then we used that to estimate the height there. Yeah,
and that gives us a good place to recreate. And I want to work with you guys and do a video or a recreation electronically, but I'm also going to mock this up full scale. And I've got Judy had a copy of the scarf that Elisa had that was used to hang her, and she has a blue one, and she let me look at that, and I was able to take measurements from it and found out that it doesn't stretch, and I've got measurements on it. So now that we can recreate the length of the scarf and work on how that would have been used if the story was true that her back was facing the stairwell and she was suspended by the scarf. Then it should have been her neckline been hanging straight in the threshold, but she's into the room by almost 3/4 of her body length, and she's face down. And that's clearly not how Elisa tells it, because her body is showing the blanching and lividity that she was face up and seated.
Well, and if you also have a body drop from, I mean, I know it's not an incredible height, but the story we're told is Sharon cut her down and she dropped straight down. I mean, shouldn't we see some type of skin slippage or some point where that body actually made contact in a rough way with the ground? And
you would expect to see something like that. And the only thing I see from the crime scene photos and the ME's photos is that on the crime scene you can see some modeling of the cement floor on her right knee, and that's the only thing I see.
Can you explain what that is for the audience?
Modeling is where it's kind of like Play-Doh, where your body is pressed against the skin, or you could do it right now with yourself. You press an object against your skin, and after a little bit, you pull that object away, and your skin will show that object in your skin. For a deceased person, there's no blood flow, so that when something presses against the body for a while, it'll model that surface. And with this modeling, there's no blanching. So you can see lividity through her right knee, but there is no blanching. So the blood hasn't been moved aside by gravity. This was definitely something that was post-mortem that pressed against her skin.
I think a good example of that, John, was in the Lauren Agee case. Remember that, where her leg was on the boat and you had that design on her knee, I think it was?
Yeah, absolutely. There's nothing to push that design back out, essentially, because the heart has stopped at that point. Yeah, and it also raises another bit of an interesting question in terms of, we have this imprint on her back, essentially, of what looks like the steps. I mean, it's the only item that matches the right size that's in the immediate area there. But when first responders show up, she is slumped over those steps, the front of her body. However, in the autopsy photos, there's no marks to the front of her body that are showing any type of indentation or anything. So it does seem like lividity has set. It does seem like, despite the fact that we know that she was placed over the stool with her breasts essentially pressed against the stool, none of that is leaving anything close to the types of marks that we're seeing on her back.
Correct. And then you have to question why the step stool is there to begin with.
Right.
So if Elisa was to have committed suicide, she wouldn't need the step stool. She could literally sit up on her knees. She could have stood up. She could have done anything to tie this noose around her neck, which the whole scarf and the noose and the hair is something that's very troubling too. Why is the hair tied into the noose end of the scarf, the noose knot? So looking at the scarf, you see that the working end that's wound on the rafter, I think that knot was tied first, and it was very loose and there's a lot of slack in it. And then the noose knot that went around Elisa's neck was very tight. There was no slack at all. It was a very small portion. I think you measured it out or saw it in the report. It was 15 centimeters. Mm-hmm. And the end of the scarf was actually used in the knot. But also her hair is wrapped in this knot, and a lot of it. And you can see that the roots are pulled out, and that there's some hair that was wrapped around her neck. If you want to say this is a suicide and you play at that angle, she's in great haste. She's making a deliberate action. She positions herself on a step stool, lays her back on it so that she could get more height to tie the very end of the scarf around her neck to hang herself, and doesn't move her hair out of her way. And I don't know any female that would do that. And I don't know anybody that commits suicide to endure more pain and suffering. So she's going to tie her own hair, pull it out by her own roots to endure more pain, to end her life, to end the suffering. None of it makes sense. And to negate any of the distance that scarf would have to cover, all she had to simply do was sit up, get on her knees, or stand up. And then if she wanted to hang herself, she could have laid down and done the job. So the use of the step stool and the position of the step stool being against her back suggests that she didn't do this to herself.
And how tall is the step stool?
I have it out in the car. I could show it to you. It's very short. It's maybe 18, 20 inches at the most.
Okay, but still, we're talking more than a foot. And with the height that we were estimating in there, if she did stand on top of the step stool, her head would probably just about be touching the actual beam, right?
Right. And if she was sitting on it, she was 5'4", 5'5". If she was sitting on it, she's still going to be almost 5 feet tall, or 4 to 5 feet tall. So right. She had plenty of real estate to use to tie the scarf where she wouldn't need it at the very end, and she could have got her hair out of the way and made it plenty tight and accomplished the mission. All of it to me suggests that she didn't tie that knot, and that the step stool was used to elevate her body, but she didn't do it.
Could I bring up something you mentioned a minute ago about the roots of the hair? I mean, is it possible? I'm just throwing out the devil's advocate arguments just to, facilitate a debate here. But let's say the hair was tied into the scarf, and then as she was cut down, the force of that is what pulled out the roots out of her hair, I guess, somehow.
It could be.
Yeah.
The lack of the lack of close-ups and scale on the scarf that was actually at the crime scene doesn't give you a lot to work with, and it's all hypothesis about how the hair got pulled out. Is it probable? It's probable. I don't think it's very likely that that's what did it. And I think that this was forcibly tied in haste. If you think about Elisa and being in duress, she had a blood alcohol content of 0.13, and she would have taken this scarf, placed it around her neck, tie a slip knot, overhand knot, in her own hair at the very end of the scarf under duress while laying on a step stool.
And John, can you go back for 1 second? Did you say you felt that the step stool itself was used for someone to stand on to tie the scarf around in the first place?
No, I think the step stool was used to position Elisa's head high enough to bridge the gap, because the scarf was already fixed and you couldn't tie it around her while she was on the floor. So you had to elevate her body so that enough that you could tie the scarf around her neck. So I think this is something that Alexander did. So I think that he tried to lift her up, and he's only 5'8" and 20 pounds heavier than her, so he doesn't have the physical strength to lift her body up. So he used the step stool to position her head and shoulders up higher so that he could tie the knot around her neck.
So something like that, could that indicate he was there by himself doing it without any assistance from anyone, would you think?
That's my theory.
Okay.
It would also assume that she's incapacitated for some reason.
Right. And I'll touch on that in a second, or we can touch on it now.
Yeah, let's go for it.
So one of the Minneapolis crime scene photos had a close up of her neck, and when you look at the photo itself, on her center part of her throat, on the thorax, Adam's apple area, you'll see that there's some skin sloughage there. May have been caused by the hanging and by cutting her down. I don't know. It's really not close enough, and there is no scale in this picture. But what you can see is a deep furrow ligature mark around her neck, and there's some hair tied into it. But if you look closely at the right side of her neck, up elevated, there's a ligature mark. It's purple. It's faint, and it looks like a thumb mark, in my opinion. If you look at the lower part of her neck, on the lower left-hand side, you'll see, again, what looks like a thumb mark on her neck. And so I created a picture, and I circled these, and there's a possible ligature mark on the center part of her neck. And the reason why that these marks aren't brighter or darker is that she didn't survive long enough for these marks to develop. And what it looks like to me is that somebody placed their hands around her throat, and it'd be like this, and squeezed the side of her neck, stopping blood flow through the carotid artery and the jugular. And you only need to do that for about 5 seconds before a person loses consciousness. And I believe that is what happened to Elisa, that she lost consciousness. Now, whether she died from this or she died after, I think that she was assaulted, and that she had a carotid or vestibular restraint, stopped the blood flow and oxygen to her brain. She lost consciousness and subsequently died.
Would it be normal for that type of attack to not be found necessarily in the autopsy?
Yeah, I've done some research on this. About 65% of the strangulation, intimate partner strangulations, show no evidence of strangulation, no evidence of ligature marks, none. And it's often missed. And these are faint. And when you look at them, you might miss it. I think in the medical examiner's report, it said there was no signs of ligature, or no signs of ligature marks or crushed cartilage in her throat. And when you look at the medical examiner's pictures, you don't see these marks. You see them in the crime scene photos, but you do not see them in the medical examiner's photos. So I don't know if the medical examiner had everything that was going on at the crime scene to make their determination, and that's one of the things I want to bring up to them. But you can see it clearly in the Minneapolis police crime scene photos that you have ligature marks of the thumb, and it coincides with a manual strangulation.
It looked like there's a slight bruising. I don't know if that's what you're referring to. See the figure 8 of hair on the right, her right.
And that's my point is that a person of reasonable intelligence with reasonable suspicion would see the same thing. Then we clearly are seeing something that's not right with her throat, and it leads to suspicious circumstances. And I think that she was strangled, manually strangled.
And one question, and I can't remember if we discussed this or not, but even if she did this to herself, if we went that scenario for a second, would it be natural, and I don't know if we need to research this, but just as a natural reaction, would someone reach up through their own throat trying to loosen up those ropes and perhaps scratch around their throat? We don't see any of that here.
We don't see that.
And I'm curious if that's something that you looked into to see if people trying to free themselves, even if they've done it to themselves, it seems like it would be a natural reaction to grab at that.
It is a very natural reaction. I've seen it in combat on the field as a medic. The body's going to fight to stay alive, and you'll fight to breathe, and you're going to fight to stop your own bleeding. And anything that's trying to kill you, your body's going to have a natural, involuntary response. The Shane Stokes breathing, you're gonna try to breathe even when it's your dying breath. Your body's still going to fight to breathe. If you have any kind of consciousness at all, your body's going to try to alleviate what's causing the strangulation or the obstruction of the airway. I had people that have committed suicide that have thrashed around and kicked, and you can see that in the crime scene that they've clawed at their throat or clawed at the noose, or they've kicked around and their feet have been flopping in the crime scene or disturbing things. I don't see any of that. I don't see any disturbed dermis on her feet. That would indicate that she was thrashing around. I don't see it in her hands. In fact, quite the opposite. When you see her hands, it looks like she's positioned with her hands crossed over her waist and they're on her left thigh, and like she's out, like she was like it just looks staged. The whole thing looks staged.
Well, and if there was some involuntary thrashing, we're talking about a pretty tight quarters where she's doing this. I mean, a foot or two to the right, if her arm just swings out, she's hitting the beam or she's hitting the wall on one side or the other.
Yeah, and so there's a dumbbell there. There's a humidifier. She's got stuff on the dresser that should have been, if she was thrashing around, may have been knocked over. I don't see any evidence of that.
Well, why do you think we don't see that?
I think she was already dead.
Okay. But how about in the initial strangulation that killed her, you don't see those marks, right?
It's quite possible that she lost consciousness within 5 seconds, and then she succumbed to the manual strangulation. I can't say why there would be an absence of those marks unless she was being pinned down. And I have a theory based on Brad's previous criminal record where he had assaulted and strangled his wife and was trying to have sexual intercourse. And this leads me to another one of my theories. Brad needed to seal the deal. He says this a lot in his text messages. And one of the things the neighbors overheard was that he wanted an annulment. And that's point 16. Neighbors heard Elisa, and they identified her voice. That was Elisa with a male, and they were having an argument outside of their house where Brad drops his cell phone. And the neighbor said that heard her yell, "I made a mistake, I want an annulment," which also kind of coincides with the message that she sent to Brad. We've made a mistake. It's not the end of the world. Mm-hmm. Maybe Brad knew that she could easily get an annulment if they didn't have sexual intercourse, and Elisa wasn't going to have voluntary sexual intercourse with him. Mm-hmm. So as he had done in the past, he strangles her, renders her unconscious, or kills her. In his desperation, he stages the crime scene and makes it look like a suicide. Because 3 days earlier, she had used the suicide ploy to get him back and had texted both him and Sharon about the suicide and making notes and all this. And Sharon was party to it, helping both Elisa and Brad. But yeah, it's very plausible that he recognized that if he didn't consummate the marriage, that she can get an annulment and he's out.
There's also another interesting aspect, and I think it's a good thing that we have a lawyer that's actually helping us with this, because she's been able to pull some files and review some information, and we've seen better detail about what happened to his wife, AJ, a statement that she actually put together that became part of the file. And it does seem like he did some things that were extremely humiliating to her sexually. I don't want to really go into detail about it, but it might be that this was some type of act like that, some type of way of demeaning Elisa during the sexual act. Might have even been something that she had experienced before from him. Yeah. But there is a very strong statement that AJ makes at the end of that, and that's basically that this guy is going to wind up killing someone.
Yep. And before I came up here, there was a senator that pushed a bill in Oklahoma to make strangulation a felony and an enhanceable crime. And lots of states have made it that manual strangulation and intimate partner violence is a premeditated murder, and it can be murder in the first degree. And they quoted a statistic that you're 750% more likely to die by intimate partner domestic violence strangulation than anything else, because it ramps up and it can go really quickly with just a blockage of your carotid artery or your jugular. In 5 seconds you can lose consciousness. Within minutes you're dead. And it's the most violent form of domestic violence there is.
We'll continue with this conversation right after this quick break. A lot of us struggle with finding happiness, dealing with tough life issues, and so much more. But you don't have to struggle alone, and you don't even have to leave your home to get the help you need, thanks to BetterHelp Online Counseling.
BetterHelp is available on desktop or mobile for both Android or iOS. You can speak to a counselor via text, chat, phone, or video.
Find secure, convenient, professional help that's affordable with BetterHelp.
BetterHelp isn't a crisis line, but you can find licensed professional counselors that you can speak to from the comfort of your own home.
3 Men and a Mystery listeners get 10% off your first month with discount code 3MEN. So why not get started today? Go to betterhelp.com/3men. Financial aid is available to those who qualify. Simply fill out a questionnaire to help them assess your needs and get matched with a counselor you'll love. That's betterhelp.com/3men. Find help to break through those personal obstacles with BetterHelp. Welcome back, and please keep in mind that our sponsors are helping us raise funds that will go towards investigating this case further and honoring the life of Elisa Gomez. So please show them the same support that they're showing us. Let's continue with John Bishop. All right, John, what are some other big points on your list here?
From the beginning, Vestal does not tell the truth about anything on the crime scene. About having her, let's just start with getting her kids out of the house. She says that she had her aunt come by and pick up the younger one and then the older one, but the older one was after she discovered Elisa's body. She admits that she had a boyfriend over. And then the timeline that Vestal puts out with Alexander is just skewed. You try to figure out exactly what was going on. She has a boyfriend upstairs in her bedroom, but she says that she spends all night down with Brad and Elisa drinking. But Elisa's text says, I'm coming back at 1:50 in the morning, so midnight 44 to 1:50. What was really going on then? And there's a disturbance outside at 2:30 in the morning, enough that a neighbor calls 911. Vestal doesn't hear it. She doesn't know what the argument's about. She doesn't hear the gate outside getting broken. She doesn't know how Elisa enters the house or goes downstairs alone, but yet she's upstairs with Brad drinking until the wee hours of the morning. And then there's no mention of the boyfriend, and she's the alibi for Brad, but there's just so many holes in it. Then you go downstairs, because Brad comes upstairs, I need you to come downstairs alone. And he's got this wild look in his eye. I can believe that. She goes downstairs, and she sees Elisa with her back to her, which I know to be false. But she says, she reaches in, grabs his toenail clippers. She didn't look at the front of her. She just started snipping the back. if you go off just that, Elisa would have been cold to the touch. Lividity and rigor mortis have been set in. There's absolutely no sign of life. And when you look at her eyes, she had that fixed glaze over her cornea. She had the death stare. There was no way you could look at her and, her tongue is protruding. There's lividity. There's no way you could just look at Elisa and think that there's any sign of life. So why cut her down? And then when you cut her down, you don't attempt to do any kind of CPR. Well, from the Minneapolis police call notes, it says that the caller, which was Sharon, was transferred to pre-arrival instructions to be given CPR and life-saving instructions. No mention at all that she checked for a pulse. She goes, as soon as I cut her down, I knew she was dead. What changed? Because she was still face down, according to her statement.
Right.
So what changed in her story? None of it makes sense. The whole way that it was presented. Brad does the same thing. Her back was to me. But then he, during his interview with detectives, he mentions that the boyfriend's there, which throws a whole new time, a whole new person into the mix. So they re-interview Sharon again. And the whole time that they're interviewing her, she segues. She's throwing qualifying statements up. My dad just died. Honestly, this, I swear to God, whatever she's trying to do. She's trying to qualify everything she says. Everything that they say, if you try to prove anything, it's just disproved immediately by the physical evidence of crime scene photos and the position of Elisa's body.
Just to play devil's advocate for a second, where do you sort where do you find the line to see whether they're lying to cover up something or if their drugs and alcohol in altered states just make them unreliable witnesses trying to recount what they saw and found when they were drunk or high?
Well, that's a fine line to go. And, watching her interview on the body camera, it's pretty obvious that she's in an altered state, inebriated or high on something. But when they give details that, just happened within the hour, like her back was to me, and when I cut her down, she fell straight down. That obviously didn't happen. Now we know she's lying or admitting that there was a boyfriend there, or, I had to go and call my aunt to come get my oldest kid before I called 911 because I had to cut her down right away. When did you cut her down? Before you called 911? After you called 911? While you're on the phone with 911? And what's the time delay when all this happened? The aunt was 5 minutes away to pick up the daughter who was supposed to be going to school, and then you cut her down, and then you called 911, or you cut her down first, then got your kid out of there, got your boyfriend out of there, and then called 911. I mean, how did this happen? What was the exact sequence of this?
Yeah, I don't think it makes sense. Just the description of, I went down the stairs, her back was to me, and I cut her down with clippers. I mean, nobody does that, right?
No.
You don't just walk up to somebody that you if they are hanging and just go, oh, yeah, let me start clipping. You're going to look around and check them and look at them. It just doesn't make a lot of sense to me.
And this is after Bradley supposedly made the comment, she's hanging down there, right? So
I don't know if she necessarily says that. You need to come downstairs. I need you downstairs, what she recalls.
Okay.
She goes down there and sees her hanging. But how many people do you know they're going to reach out and touch a dead person?
Yeah.
I mean, there's cops that won't do that. It takes training. It takes some, mindset. Even in battle, you see a dead person, you don't want to touch them. Most people don't want to touch a dead body.
Yeah. But maybe if it was your friend, you might look. I mean, you would look. But I think it's just weird that she says she cut him down, her down, but didn't even look at her face or anything. Just kind of walked up, cut her down. That just makes no sense.
Oh, and she was cussing at her too. She makes a point of that during her interview. She was cursing her.
That's right.
John, are you finding any reason why Sharon would be lying?
There's possible reasons. One, that message that Elisa sent that was, I'm better off on my own, and she was cutting ties and kicking her out of the house too. Two, that she's the text message that she had sent with Brad, there was a connection with her and Brad. Sharon would use Elisa's Jeep to go pick up Brad when he was the weekend before he was out drugging in North Minneapolis and doing PCP and marijuana and too intoxicated to drive. So he bribed her to come out and pick him up with drugs and sex. So they may have had an intimate relationship. The text messages support that.
They're very, we went through a lot of them, and they were very vulgar and straight to the point.
Yes.
Yeah, they're being pretty direct about at least trying to arrange some type of party hookup at a hotel room. Seems like other people might be involved. I think they're talking about a hot tub and drugs.
Another woman. It's going to be so nasty. You can't tell anybody. Delete these messages.
Yeah,
and it's a reward for Sharon to do what Brad needs done, which is a ride or talk to Elisa and calm her down.
And that's a matter of days before the wedding.
Yeah, that was October 8th. And there was a lot of that message. And from the conversation that Brad had with Sharon on his one phone, you could see that there's a pattern of Sharon going to rescue Brad, giving him rides, probably meeting his other contacts in the drug world.
And Sharon also seemed as kind of an in-between in their relationship. Elisa kind of enlisted Sharon also during a fight she was having with Brad, where Elisa wanted to stage a suicide situation. She wanted it to look to Brad like she had done an attempt at suicide, and she's talking to Sharon the whole time and trying to get Sharon to help her with that, which Sharon did mention in her interview.
Yes, and that was also the same day. So the very same day, she's trying to talk Brad in. Elisa's trying to talk Brad into coming home. Sharon is saying, "I'll give you a ride. What do you need me to do?" And then Brad thinks that Elisa had cheated on him. So he says, he tells Elisa in a text, "I'm going to cheat on you." And then he texts Sharon next saying, "If you come get me, we'll do drugs. We'll have sex. We'll have a party. It'll be so nasty." And I've taken all those out of the cell phone report and put them together. So I have every conversation during that weekend by text.
There's also some things in that text thread where Brad is essentially admitting to criminal activities of a few different types. Is it normal for him to not kind of be prosecuted for that, or no one to file charges when I know it's not directly related to this case, but if you're reviewing this information and this guy's talking about, we're going to rob people so we could buy drugs, there's no follow-up that would happen from law enforcement on something like that?
I can't speak to theirs, but he was on probation during this. So he's not supposed to have any kind of drugs or alcohol to begin with. He's not supposed to be, he's a convicted felon. He's not supposed to be in possession of a firearm or hanging around with known felons. Engaging in criminal activity, that's at the very least enough that the probation and parole officer should be looking at it. In his own words, he's making these statements and he's implicating the other people that he was involved with by his text. For me, I would have taken that to probation and parole, and I would have launched an investigation separate to that. Also, and what it also does is it impugns his character. He's not trustworthy. Brad is not a trustworthy person, and it shows his character that he's out drugging and thugging the weekend before his wedding. And even, he's doing all this despite Elisa begging him to come home, and she's trying to make a change and trying to love that out of him. It's pretty sad to read.
Yeah. And you also get a very distinct sense of, I don't know if it's two different sides to him or things within his personality, but when he talks to Elisa, he kind of seems like a normal guy in terms of the text messages, even when they're fighting. And yes, sometimes he'll get nasty and talk about how old she is or things like that. But when he starts talking to Sharon, I almost feel like it's a different person talking. Like it's street and there's slang in it. I had to look some stuff up and say, what the heck were they saying? I didn't understand what that was. So it seems like there's two very distinct sides to him. And in particular, when he gets around some people for these criminal activities that he's mentioning in his text, it seems like his language just completely changes.
Yeah, there's a duality to him. One, he's a manipulator with Elisa. He knows what he wants, and he can put on that persona and keep that act up. And I think what you're truly seeing when he talks to Sharon is his other side, the dark side, the things that we don't know about Brad. He's come from a bad background. He hangs out with nefarious people that are into drugs and gang banging, and he's a con man. He's simply a con man, looking for his next high, his next score, his next victim of opportunity.
So as someone that's used to arriving at scenes like this and talking to people and questioning them, knowing what to ask, when you review the questioning by the investigators there. Do you feel like they sort of let Sharon and Bradley off too easily? Do you think they should have treated the death more suspicious at first until there was reason to think that it shouldn't be suspicious?
I do. The line of questioning, it seemed like they were almost leading the questionnaire. What did you see next? Who came home? Did you check for signs of life? Instead of, I treat an interview like a blank piece of paper. I ask them, okay, tell me what happened. And I let them go through their story, and then I use that to pin them down on specifics. Some of it would be, if you get them to say that X, Y, Z happened in this order, and then you find out it didn't, now you can go back and, well, you earlier said this. Now what's the truth? Why are you now changing your story? How come the physical evidence doesn't match up? Or with Sharon, hey, when we first talked, you didn't mention your boyfriend at all. And why is it he's in there now and you didn't mention him at all? And tell me about what's going on with the kids. Why is there such a change in your story? Why doesn't this add up? And they didn't ask anything about the fence. They didn't ask anything about what the argument was that happened outside with the phone. They knew that the neighbors had found the phone, that there was an argument outside, but there was no questioning about what was the argument. Why, what was the argument? Was there an argument after the Cedar Inn and when they left, and to the time that she had come home? And they didn't know. They may not have known that there was about an hour difference where Elisa wasn't home, but when they did discover it, you don't really see that follow-up in there. And one of the things they teach you in interview and interrogation schools is if you're going to interview somebody and you have suspicion about them, you can front load stress on them by body positioning and take them out of their element. And it seems like this interview was done in a detective car in the front of the house, and they were not in a. They were. I guess limited for time, or they didn't want to spend a lot of time interviewing. So they didn't take him downtown and put him in an interview room and read him Miranda and get him off guard and front load a lot of stress, because when you front load a lot of stress on somebody you're interviewing, you can get a lot, you get body reactions, you get a lot more truth out of them. And you pick up on a lot more deception clues too. The stomach makes all kinds of noises. People's mannerisms, their speech, they start to sweat. They have micro expressions. They do editing. Sharon was doing that at the scene. She was editing and making qualifying statements at the scene. She was deceptive from the beginning. So I think that they could have done a lot better on the interview. They should have followed up more in depth when they just noticed some of the discrepancies, if they noticed them. That's one of the things that I want to look into, is the discrepancies and try to find witnesses. So what we're doing now is going back through the case and interviewing everybody we can to try to get their story on this. And Brad was incarcerated in Minnesota and in Oklahoma. And his Oklahoma connection's kind of another small world deal. He picked up a Minnesota girl named Kim Mendoza, drove to, I think they were going to Texas or Mexico, and had her 2 little kids with. And they stopped in Garvin County and they broke into a deputy's house. And luckily he wasn't there, but the son was, and chased him off. And Kim was arrested at the house. The kids were taken into custody. They're malnourished, emaciated, had lice. It was traumatizing for the people that found him at the kids' condition. But Brad was hiding behind a set of karaoke speakers in his dive bar in Wayne Payne, Oklahoma. And then he got locked up for 185 days in Garvin County. So Carrie and I went down to Garvin County. We got the phone calls from the jail, and we've talked to people down there, and we're still talking to people. And I'm pretty sure Brad had talked to some of the inmates, and we'll find out if he made some statements, because he has made statements, which is my point 19, that you couldn't pin this on me. The cops are stupid. He was saying, we've had other people said that he said that to his close friends, said it by text, that you couldn't pin it on me. The cops are stupid. I'm in the clear now. And he thinks he got away with it. And for most purposes he did, except for people like us that are looking at it and seeing the injustice and going back after him.
There's another point in terms of the interviews that I always got caught up on, which was what I call the black hole. You're interviewing these people about a big conflict that happened the night before, and the story about how that de-escalates is just completely missing. I know there's a couple photos that make it look like at some point Elisa might have been in the kitchen. I believe her cell phone's found in the kitchen. And there is like a tub of leftovers that it looks like might have been microwaved or something, but literally like one bite has been taken out of it, and that's left on the kitchen counter as well. Are you considering these things when you're trying to put together what the movement was that night? I mean, did she go for a walk when she texted them back?
I'm considering that. I looked at the phone and her food and the Mountain Dew that was open in the kitchen. And, the question, when you eat, you normally put down your phone or whatever else you're doing. And she heated up this food. Likely, Elisa heated up this food. But why did she stop eating? Why was the Mountain Dew left there? Why did she leave her phone there? And why did she go down to the basement? And another question is, why was she dressed the way she was? She was found in just panties and in 3 shirts, 2 sweatshirts and undershirt and a bra. It's October in Minnesota, so it's not that cold. Yeah. But she's not wearing the clothes that she was seen leaving the bar in, and she's not wearing her wedding clothes. And the dress is very disturbing to not only me, but other people that looked at it. Carrie's looked at it. Angie, her sister, Judy, they all have questions about, her shirt and the sleeves. A woman wouldn't do that, dress herself that way. It seems like the shirts were staged. Her panties were almost perfectly put on. Now, it doesn't really matter, except, she supposedly committed suicide, and she knew that somebody's going to find her like that. And I don't, some people not only stage themselves, but they stage a note, they stage the scene. They don't want to be found in this. They're embarrassed or trying to end their suffering. So if you play the devil's advocate and say she was committing suicide, she sure was in desperation and haste when she went in that kind of dress.
Yeah, don't women generally they want to look at least decent when somebody finds them?
Yeah, if women want to look decent when somebody finds them. There's another thing too. Elisa had an appointment to meet her daughter that morning for breakfast. Jade, who was present during her wedding the night before, who's the world tour, and she knew that Jade was coming over. Why would she commit suicide on this eve, knowing that her daughter was coming over that morning and could be one of the people that found her? And from talking to Judy and Angie and from people that know her, she would have never done this. It's absolutely out of character. And you have to take that to heart too. And another thing that people say about is out of character is that she had dogs that she was sitting, and she, that was her life. Her kids and her dog and her art were her life. So why would she be taking care of animals, having her daughter come over for breakfast that morning, and this eve would be the night, the straw that broke the camel's back, the reason why she's going to commit suicide? None of that makes sense, and it's all strongly suspicious.
And to not have a plan for those dogs that she cared so much about, to have like someone to follow up and take care of them, because animal lovers like her really go out of their way to make sure the animals are taken care of.
So she would have written a note. Is what you're saying.
It seems like she would have had a plan in place, even if that was the case.
Well, I have that down too, where she had faked on the 8th. She was faking a suicide with Sharon's help to Brad, and she had staged notes. She had left notes that she was going to commit, that she was leaving Brad, the Pathfinder, to take care of the dogs, and that she had left notes for her children. She left a note to Brad saying, the letter is on my white dresser. This is the white dresser that's immediately inside the bedroom that you can see with a scarf on it and belongings. She also said, there are letters for my kids. Also, please make sure they get them. I'm just going to sign the Pathfinder over to you. We should be even then. Brad and her were fighting about work that was done at the house and how Brad should have been paid for his time and his efforts and what he had done. And Elisa's like, I'll pay you. I have this much in my bank account, but I'll just give you the Pathfinder. So Brad believed that he was owed money for the work he did and that he should be paid out by Elisa. And so she was ready to give him the Pathfinder. She also had earlier talked about dogs, and one of the messages that Elisa sent was, at least effing do this for me. Take care of Winston, the dog. The least you can do is take care of him. You're getting my house and cars. I took a lot of medicine. And that was her suicide statement. So even though she was telling him that took a lot of medicine, the dogs were, first and foremost, please take care of the dogs.
I know you met with Judy and Ange this past week as well. I know you've both made promises to them about the fact that you're not going to let this go. You're not going to disappear on them. You're going to keep going with this case. So what are the next steps for you guys?
Our next steps, I'm working now on finishing the witness list that I have. I have a pretty extensive witness list that I want to talk to people that may have had knowledge of Alexander before and after Elisa's death. We're hoping to talk to Sharon Vestal tonight. And we have an interview possibly set up with her. We'll see if she goes through with it. We have other people that we're going to talk to this weekend. We're going to meet with Kim Mendoza and her mother. And then our goal is to present this to the Hennepin County Medical Examiner's Office and show them the investigation that Minneapolis police did, the crime scene photos, our investigation, and ask them to change the cause determination from undetermined to homicide, which would hopefully open up the Hennepin County District or Prosecutor's Office to open a murder investigation on Alexander or the Minneapolis Police Department. I'm hoping to stay with it as far as they'll let me go, and hopefully find justice for Elisa and bring Brad to trial for murder.
Well, we're coming up on the end of the season here, but we're not going anywhere. We certainly want to help move this thing forward, and anything we can do to help you on those efforts, you know how to reach us. And thank you so much for all of your work on this. Thank you for being part of a growing team around Judy, really, that is trying to help her find justice for her daughter, come to a better understanding of what actually happened there. There is no shortage of people that we've been contacted by that are moved by this case, people that know Elisa and just are adamant there is no way that she did this to herself. And there's no shortage of people that know Brad and say he's absolutely capable of something like this. Those trends have been very consistent with us the whole time that we've been doing this work. John, anything else you wanted to say before?
If anybody has information they want to come forward and talk to me, they can reach out through you guys, and you can put them in touch with me. I appreciate what the three men in a mystery are doing for this case and for other cases. You guys are doing great work, and I'll continue to share the information that I develop with Carrie to you guys so that we can bring justice for Elisa.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for your time, John. We really appreciate you.
It's been an honor. Thank you.
If you're struggling, go ahead, Mark.
I was just going to say, great insights you provide, by the way.
That was excellent.
Yeah. I had a feeling that we were going to get some good. I really wanted to bring you in at this point because I knew you were going to be able to share a bunch of information that I didn't necessarily have access to, and talking about it from a formal investigative standpoint, it's a whole different world. So we really appreciate you being here. Thank you so much for that.
Like I said, it's an honor, guys.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
All right. So we've got a little recording to do just to finish off the show here. And guys, I have two endings we got to record because I don't know if LA Not So Confidential is still coming on next week. So
okay, let's
blow through these real quick. If you're struggling with thoughts of ending your own life, please don't hesitate. Call the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline at 1-800-273-8255. It's there 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
Please join us on the finale live stream on Wednesday, April 8th at 6 Pacific, 7 Mountain, 8 Central, and 9 Eastern on my channel, Gray Hughes Investigates, and make sure you hit the subscribe button and the notification bell.
You can find out more about our show at www.threemeninamystery.com. And if you're planning on coming to CrimeCon Orlando on May 1st through the 3rd to meet us and many of your other favorite true crime podcasters and YouTubers, remember to use code 3men20. That's with the number 3. You'll save 10% on your admission.
If you have any feedback, corrections, or new details, you can send them to us via email at 3meninamystery.com with the numbers 3s. Or you can reach out to us on Twitter at 3meninamystery is our handle there, again with the number 3. Or you can find us on Facebook.
3 Men in a Mystery is produced by John Lorden, Mike Morford, and Gray Hughes.
Please be sure to rate us on the podcasting platform that you found us on, and help us grow by telling your friends and family about us.
We're nearing the end of the season, and we still have a big question. Did Elisa end her own life, or was she murdered? Can two forensic psychologists help us understand this better? We'll be back in 2 weeks with Dr. Scott and Dr. Shiloh from the podcast LA Not So Confidential. I'm John Lorden.
I'm Mike Morford.
And I'm Gray Hughes.
And we are Three Men and a Mystery.